Good evening, everyone. We will soon be starting with the session Build an AI web app using Python and Flask. Just a few more minutes and we'll start. So this is me, Amisha Kirti, the Alpha Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador. And in this session, before we proceed, I hope mm, all of you have completed the prerequisites. So let's take a look at the prerequisites. They are, you must have the Azure Students account and you must have Python installed in your system and a Visual Studio Code. Even if you don't have the Azure account at the moment, in this session you can make out with mine, but for later you must have an Azure Students account. So the learning objectives for this session is we will learn how to set up a Flask development environment. We will learn how to use Flask to build a form. And we will also use the translator service to translate text. Just a few minutes, I'll be admitting the other participants. Moving ahead with the session. The agenda for the session is, first of all, we'll take a look at the introduction. Next, we will set up the development environment. We will then proceed with the Flask fundamentals and create an app that will be a translation app in different languages. So before we proceed, I hope you all have created the Azure Students account. And if you haven't, you can do it right now. Okay, so let's start. As we will be using Flask in this web application, so we must need an introduction to it. The artificial intelligence web app that we are going to create will not involve a lot of coding, but most of all, we will focus on how to create the website and add the service to it, which will be the Azure Cognitive Service. And our website will be translating the text entered by the user into a different language. For the front end, we'll be using Flask, and for the back end, we'll be using the Microsoft Azure Cognitive Service. We, in a web app, we classify front end and back end separately, and we will be using Flask because it is the best framework till now that integrates front end and back end on a platform for dynamic websites. So moving ahead with our session, we need to set up a development environment. So we will check out whether Python is installed in the correct directory and the correct version. Next, we will also check the Visual Studio Code installation, and then we will proceed with the project. First of all, we'll create a directory. So let's move forward. In the command prompt, we will check the Python version first. You must use Python greater than the version 3.6, and our Visual Studio code is already there in my system, so I don't need to verify that. Next, the first step that we're going to do is create a directory for our project. So I'll be creating it in the desktop folder. And the command that I'll be using is mkdir and the name of the app. So this is going to be the directory. And then we will change to that directory. Now we will be opening Visual Studio Code using the command code dot. So as you can see, this is how the directory opens in Visual Studio Code. Here we will be working on our project. This is the folder. I'll zoom it out a bit. Okay. I hope it is visible now. Next, we will be proceeding with our session that after we have checked our development environment, we need to create a virtual environment for our project. And in that virtual environment, we'll be installing Flask and other libraries. So to create a virtual environment, we will do it in our command prompt where we created the directory. And the command that we are going to write for that is Python -m venv two times, and venv is the short form for virtual environment. It will take a few minutes, and after the virtual environment is created, we will then change to that directory. We create a virtual environment because in this project we will be making use of backend, which will involve a server, and it will also involve an API. So while we do that, we need to install certain libraries that we are going to use. And for that, while this gets executed, we can proceed to our Visual Studio Code, and we will create a requirements.txt file in which we are going to add the libraries and the app that we need. So first of all, we'll be using Flask in our application. Next, we'll be using Python -.env. I'll tell you later about this. And requests. We'll be using these in our application. So we'll save it. Let's check if our virtual environment is created. So you can see it is created. The next command that we need to give is we will activate the virtual environment using this command /venv scripts and activate. So, and here only we will be installing all the libraries. Because we need to install multiple libraries, that's why we are using a requirements.txt file. It will install all the libraries at once. In your system, it might take a few minutes, but so as you can see, the libraries are getting installed. So while it is getting installed, let's proceed ahead. This is how our development environment will be set. Next, we'll see what is Flask all about. Flask is an open source web micro framework. When we say micro framework, it means that in a very small bundle, it installs all the templates and libraries that we use in our web application to make it dynamic. It performs all the tasks of the web framework, but as it is micro, it might not include the advanced features. And therefore, like We need routes and templates in every web application. You might not be aware of it right now, but in a few slides later, you'll get to know more about it. So when we move to a website and when we click on a button, it navigates us to another site. In the back end, the job is done through routes. In every web application, like as you can see, the adventureworks.com is the main site. And if we click on the products, it navigates to another URL. That URL is done through the routing method. And every web application needs to include the code for routing in them. And the methods basically used for routing are get and post. Like if we want to access a form, we will use the get method in our code to get it. And when we submit it, the post method is called. Let's see more about it. Like we are the client, and whenever a client requests a form, like if he clicks on a form for registration, in the backend, there is a get method that calls the server, and the server sends the HTML form displaying to the user. When the user completes the form and hits the submit button, his results are sent via the post method. And the post method is added in the routing method in all the web applications. Similar, not only Flask, even in Django, we use the routes to submit the form or to get the form on the screen. After the submit button is clicked, the server processes the information and sends the result in HTML form. A route is just a path to the action. Whatever action a website has to take, it uses this method. Next, this is the code that we'll be using. You might not understand it right now, but just take a look. In the methods, we use the get when we have to display a form to the user. And when the user has to submit the results or the input he has entered, the post method will be used in the backend. Moving ahead. Now, the most important part that a web application uses is templates. Templates allow us to create a page structure. Like every HTML page have a nav bar which is static and a footer which is static. So we can put them in a template which we don't have to load every time while dynamically displaying data. Saying dynamic means when a user has to enter data or has to do some other application on the website, it does not always has to use the static content, and that will be automatically load on our framework and it will save a lot of our time. So this was all about framework, Flask framework, and there's a knowledge check. So Flask is the framework for building web apps. Which one of the following in which one of the following languages? Python and Node.js, Python and Java, or Python only? So you can tell the answer in the chat box. Or we can proceed further. The answer would be Python only. So before we start to create our application totally, I would like to introduce you to the module with which we are going to take reference in building this project. It is the Microsoft Learn module, which is known by the name Build Real World Applications with Python. And we will be taking reference of the third module, and it teaches us how to build the AI web app by using Python and Flask. So after we are done with our Flask fundamentals, we will straight away move to creating our application. We will check whether our libraries are installed or not. So as we can see, our libraries are installed. So we will proceed further. Now that our libraries are installed, the very first task we have to do is create the app.py file, because Flask uses Python and its main application code is written in the app.py file. And to proceed further, we will also be making use of this module. And the first command that we'll write in the app.py will be, from the Flask, we will be importing Flask, the main library, a redirect function, a URL for function, a request, a render template, and the session. These are the basic libraries that need to be installed every time we start or we proceed with the web application. After we are done with it, we will add the route method, because every time a Flask application is loaded, we need to display a screen to it. So this is the main app.py file that will be loaded as soon as we run the Flask application. And we will save this. And as you can see, when we need to proceed with the HTML page, we need to create an HTML page that will be displayed. To store the HTML page, we will be using the templates feature of Flask. Flask, every time whenever it has to display some UI, it uses the templates folder in which all the HTML files are stored. Even you can also move to the Microsoft Learn module, in which the template for our form is given, as we will be creating a translator application. So for that, the user needs to get a form on its website. So this is the template that we will be using, and we will just add it on our index.html. We don't need to go into the depth of it because it is simple web application. I hope you all are aware with web development. So in the body, as you can see, this is the HTML header. And when we move to the body, it uses a form with a post method, and it will allow the user to enter a text area and the options with which it can convert the language into a desired language, and a submit button. This is the basic website that we are going to create. And after we have added our index.html, we are going to run it. So to run it, we will take a new terminal. And every time to run a Flask application, we need to set the environment. To set the environment, we will add the command set flask underscore env is equal to development. Now we will add the command flask run to see what website we have created. And as you can see, after we run the command flask run, it is running on this URL. We will navigate to this URL, and I hope it is visible. So this is the HTML UI that we have created. This is the service, and this is the box in which the user will be able to enter the text. And right now, as we have not added anything extra to it, so it will lead us to method not allowed because we have not yet added the route after the submit button. So we'll start working on it. Before that, let's proceed with our presentation. So this is what we did. First of all, we created a core application. We have added the route. As you can see, the first HTML form that got loaded using the index.html. And our application has been tested. So this is the next question. What is the default port number that Flask uses to service HTTP requests? Just now we clicked on the link, and if you observed carefully, the port number was 5000. So this is just a basic question. Next, in what subdirectory should Jinja template files be stored by default? So as I told you, in Flask, a template is used to display all the HTML and whatever CSS we have. Just now we created the folder, the templates folder, and that is the answer. So let's move ahead. Now that we have created our first page of our application, we need to add the backend. The backend part would be to add the translator service. And to add the translator service, we will be using the Azure Cognitive Services, which allows us to translate a given text into dozens of languages. So let's move to the Azure portal. We can create a new tab. Although I have created a web app already, but we can start from scratch. You can go to portal.azure.com and sign in with your email ID or the account that you have created. This is the app that I have been created by earlier, but now we will start from scratch. To add the cognitive service, first of all, we need to create a resource. And in the resource, we will search translator. So this is how translator on Microsoft Azure looks. And we will click on the create button. Because I'm using the student subscription, so here you will see the subscription, it is selected Azure for students. Otherwise, you can also start a free tier. And I have already created a resource group. Otherwise, you can click on create new and create a new resource. Flask AI is the resource group that I'll be using. You must select the region nearest to nearest to yourself. So here it's Southeast Asia. And the name could be anything. You can give it a translator app name. Next, you need to add the pricing tier and it will be a free one. So as I have already created this app, we need to create a new. Similarly, we'll be creating review plus create. Because I have already created a resource, so it will not allow me to add another free tier. But after we create our application, it looks like this. This is the resource group. As you can see, Flask AI, the location and the subscription, whichever we created. And after we create our Azure account and the resource, we need to move to keys and endpoint. This Azure Cognitive Service serves as an API for our project. And we will be adding this key and whatever endpoint we need. Endpoint is wherever the URL goes to fetch the data. So let's move ahead. We have already created the translator service. And like I mentioned, we need a key because it is an API. For every API or to call any service, we will need a key and it needs to be used in our application, but it should never be stored in our source code because people will misuse it. So we have already created the key. Now we need to create a .env file to store the key. As we added in the library requirements.txt to add the .env, this is how it will be used. So let's create our .env file. We need to add it in the project directory and not the templates directory. So here we'll be storing our key. the location, and our endpoint. It is also mentioned in the exercise, like in the .env file, we need to add our key, our endpoint, and our location. So our key looks like key 1 and key 2, both are the same. We will copy it. We will also copy the text translation endpoint and we will add it in our .env. This is the endpoint. Next, we need to add our key. This is our key and location is Southeast Asia. So now our backend task is done. The next step that we need to take, that after the user enters the submit button, it needs to be routed to another screen. And the screen will display the data that the user will get after translating the language. To do that, we need to add a few libraries in our app.py because that is the place from where our application will run. After the first import, we need to add some other imports like from .env, the file that we created, we will add the function that loads whatever key or parameters that we have added. And after adding the libraries, we need to add another method which the user clicks to get the results on the screen. We can close this for now. This is the get method that routes us to index.html. And after the user is done with the index.html, the following code, you can find it on Microsoft Learn as well. So it will be used to display the data on the screen. To display the data, first of all, it reads the original text from the user in the request, and it reads the target language as shown to the as selected by the user. So as you can see on our website that we created, this is the translator app demo. I'm unable to navigate, just a second. Okay, so this is the app. First of all, the user will enter the message that he or she wants to translate, and he or she will select the language as well. As soon as the language is selected and translate button is clicked, the route method will be called, and from the .env file, all the API will be used to call the endpoint and the location. Using the path, it will create a URL and it will take the response and display it to the user in the results.html. So we need to create results.html in which are translated text, our original text, and the target language in which the user has displayed, selected to translate the text will be displayed. So let's go to our template folder and we will create results.html. In the results.html, we'll be using the same code. By the same code, I mean whatever is mentioned on the module. You don't need to pay more attention to whatever because we are more focusing on the backend and how to integrate the cognitive service to our application. So this is how our results.html would look, and we will run the application again. To stop the already running application, we will press Ctrl C and we will run the Flask run command again. And our website is up again. So let's check how our app is running. Now we are going to test the page that we have created. This is how our website looks like. Like if I write, it is going to rain today, and I translate it to Italian. So this is how it is going to look. As you can see, it gets routed to results.html. The original text that we entered was it is going to rain today. And the translated text in Italian is this. Because the screen is minimized, just a minute, I'll maximize the screen. Okay, so this is how our application looks. We'll move to our presentation again. We are done with creating a translating service. We call the translator service. This is the last step. Our application is created. If you paid attention in the module, what is the name of the HTTP header that carries the API keys in calls to the Azure Cognitive Service? I think there are people waiting in the lobby. So the answer is OCP APIM subscription key. So we are proceeding to the end of the session. As you can see, the app that we created, we can test more on our application. We can try another one. We can enter some more text. So basically what our application does, it takes the user's message, it takes the input from the form, and as soon as we click this button, it calls the API, and the API's results are displayed in the results.html. So that is the application that we created. So we are almost to the end of the session. In this workshop, I hope you learned the core concepts of building the websites in Python by using the Flask framework. Moreover, after this, you can try deploying your websites on Azure. Right now, it is only on our local machine, and you can also connect to the Azure functions using the IoT devices and cognitive services. And you can also create machine learning models on Azure. So I'll be pasting the feedback form in the comment section. Please fill out the feedback form. Also, you can yourself learn the Microsoft Learn module. I'll also be pasting the link to that. These documentations and modules are for free, so you can create your application. And you can also use them in your hackathons and other, like it allows you to use Azure free tier cognitive service. It can be used as an API in your applications. So we'll be winding up the session in just 5 minutes. The module that we learned today was building the AI application. Apart from that, if you are new to Python or you need to brush up your skills in Python, you can take up these modules as well. You can also take up object-oriented programming with Python. And after the application is created, we need to test it. So how to test using Python, you can learn from this. As you can see, the time is very limited and very short duration modules, 20 minutes and 45 minutes. So you can easily give up part of your day to learn these things. So if you have any doubts, you can paste it up in the chat. You'll also be getting the recording. The session is being recorded and you can find it on your emails. And do fill up the feedback form. So let's wind up the session. Thank you, everyone.